as a nonprofit organization since about 1951, when they organized here in the US. And they now are spread around the world doing conservation work. And you'll hear a little bit about TNC's priorities as we move through today's presentation. This clicker has been giving me trouble all day. Thank you, Joey.
Very good.
Not working? All right. Oh, there we go. So by the numbers, what has the Nature Conservancy done? We've impacted conservation in over 70 countries worldwide. We have over 100, we operate over 100 marine protected areas, conservation projects around the world. So we work in oceans and freshwater. We have over 400 scientists working with us so that we can best make those steps in management and take those steps in conservation that help get us to a brighter future with a healthier Earth. And we have protected more than 125 million acres worldwide. So there's many facets to the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to focus in on our chapter. So within the Nature Conservancy, we have chapters, and you might be familiar with those like through Audubon or some other organizations. But TNC is different in that we're not a separate, this Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota chapter is not a separate nonprofit. We are under the global umbrella of TNC. So they are starting to refer to our chapters now as business units. And Minnesota is unique in that we have a tri-state chapter or a tri-state business unit. It's the only one in North America, and it's Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So all of our staff live and work in this tri-state area. The types of places we work are grasslands, trying to protect grasslands, reintroducing buffalo to the grasslands. We also work in freshwater. Of course, Minnesota has a lot of freshwater, and we also work in the Little Missouri headwaters area outlined in blue there. And then finally, forests. And forests is where I do my main work. We're in the upper Mississippi forest area. And I don't know how that works on Zoom. Can you see red dots on Zoom? We'll see. All this area you can see, TNC is pretty active. We don't own this land, right? But these are the landscapes that we work in partnership with federal government, state government, private landowners, and sometimes we do have our own preserves, and we do have preserves scattered throughout these three tri-state areas. What are our priorities? So there's a national global TNC priority, and our state priorities are aligned with those. Protect land and water at the top, and tackle climate change. Those are two of our national priorities as well. Protect land and water means we work to preserve areas. So that might be helping an easement and transferring it to another organization. It might mean helping with reforestation in our state parks. And we also go address climate change. One of the cool things that got me really excited to be working with TNC is this idea of looking for climate change solutions using natural methods. And what does that mean? That means planting trees, right? Trees store carbon. We know that we can look at our forests, we can look at what we're doing to the land and help the land be more resilient, be ready for that change that's coming about, and also be part of the solutions, hopefully. Our third one, which I won't talk about today, is provide food and water sustainably. I'm not part of that particular, we have teams, I'm part of the forest team. But these are the main priorities that we work under in many different ways. So within the Minnesota, within my realm of work, we have what we call pillars. These are just, how are we going to do our work? And where is it organized? So one is conserving lands, right? Whether that's putting easements on, whether it's helping others build capacity to protect lands, that's a way we might work. Climate adaptation, I mentioned forest restoration. I was just over in Duluth yesterday looking at some of the Northeast forest restoration work. If you look at the history, look at our forests around us. The forests that are around us are forests that have been impacted by our actions over the last 100 years. They're not the forests that were here 200 years ago, 300 years ago, before European settlement. Those are a different type of forest. And if you start to understand the forest, you can start being part of the solution, helping to identify how do we make those forests more healthy. Today, I'm going to talk about this living with fire and indigenous landscapes and communities for the most part. These are all parts of the Sand Plains project. And that's a project that I was hired to work on. And we'll be working in these indigenous landscapes. I'll talk a little bit more about that after we talk quickly about forests. And as I mentioned, forests. What do you notice about this forest on the left?
It was planted after they cut it down.
Yeah, it's planted, right? It could almost be corn rows. It's in rows. There's no understory. There's no diversity. It's all one species. This is kind of unusual in that it's white pine. Typically around here, we see red pine, right? Lots of red pine. And that's what we're working in this landscape, is to diversify the red pine. On the right, that looks like a better example of a forest. It does have much more undergrowth in it, which is a good thing. It has a lot of hazel in it. If we were to look at some of the older forests, we might note that there's still mostly red pine there. There's what we would call even age, meaning the trees are, there's a lot of trees of the same age, instead of having older trees and younger trees and this mix. So that's one of the things we look at when we're looking at a forest. This one here, who's heard of the Greenwood Fire? Taking place right now up by Isabella, burning thousands of acres. Part of the reason we are having these catastrophic wildfires is because we haven't had fire in the landscape on a regular basis. And I'm going to bring a picture in on that pretty soon here. But here we have something that has occurred up in the Greenwood area, lots of small balsam, and you see a large white pine. We have pests that cycle through regularly. And this particular case, we have spruce budworm that is cycling through in the Arrowhead region and killing most of the balsam. Unfortunately, we're finding out it's also attacking the spruce. And yesterday on my field trip, I saw several nearly 100-year-old spruce that were being decimated from the top by the spruce budworm. So this is not a healthy forest either, because what's happened in the Greenwood Fire is these balsam have been attacked, they've died, and they now provide a ladder for fire to climb from the forest floor into the canopy and become these much hotter, more devastating fires. So what are we looking for? We are looking for this change from simple forests, where you have all one age, all one species, to much more complexity, different age forests, different age trees, understory of a wide variety, right? Those herbs, those plants, blueberries, wild ginger, many of those species that are difficult to find sometimes. And also, of course, the dead and down trees or the dead standing trees, which provide so many homes for many of our animals on the forest. I'm going to talk just briefly about fire in this landscape. We know fire was here quite a long time ago, and there's a lot of information here. This is the Preacher Grove at Itasca, if anyone's been down there. And these little triangular shapes called cat faces are the result of multiple forest fires moving through this system. How many of you have heard of Smokey the Bear? Or Smokey Bear? There's some discretion there. Well, basically, since the early 1900s, here in North America, we've said, we don't want fire, fire's not good. But these lands, these forests around us evolved with fire. The people that lived here set a lot of those fires to get and renew the land for berries every 6 to 7 year cycle, to bring back hazel growing in certain forms. There was a big history, and that's what this graph shows. So scientists actually looked at trees like this, and they could identify what years the fires went through a particular stand, a particular group of trees. And just to give you some info on this slide, each gray line is a tree. So this is like the length, the life of a tree going this way. This is the occurrence of fire, the red down on the bottom, starting from 1500 to the year 2000. These two blue lines are when this particular study of 414 trees was done in the Boundary Waters Canoe area through the University of Minnesota. Kippmuller, I apologize. But here in 1737, we have documented presence of the Anishinaabe people at Crane Lake in the Boundary Waters. And then the second one, the second blue line is when the Superior Forest Reserve was established. And when fire was, you were fined if you were caught setting fire to your forest and trying to actually use it in a good way. So you can see the occurrence of fire that happened between 1737 and 1900 multiple times, and across the landscape thousands of times. So our plants and our trees evolved with that fire. And then we shut off the fire in about 1910. So what has transpired in our forests, in addition to the logging, right? And that was part of the reason for holding off fires, is this absence of fire. So in our program, TNC's work that I'll explain a little more, but my work is to help the Leech Lake Band in whatever capacity they ask of us. How can we help bring fire back into the landscape to improve the health of the forest? And so TNC has resources, we have staff and different things, and we work in partnership a lot. And our goal is, how can we support the Leech Lake Band and the Chippewa National Forest, who is managing some of the land in forest management. And we do know, the science shows us that Indigenous peoples' land management does a good job. It actually stores more carbon. There's fewer deer densities in Anishinaabe managed lands. This is from a First Stewards Outcomes of Forest and Wildlife Stewardship by Indigenous peoples in Wisconsin. So just right next door. And no net loss of plant diversity, right? Wouldn't that be great to see? These are some of the indigenous communities that we're working with, TNC, across Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota. We just shared out, not sure, I think it was about maybe it was only 100 bison this year because of the drought needing to cull. And so we were able to get those to 3 different tribal nations across North America, actually, not just within our unit. I'm going to speak to you today more about the sand, or Joey's going to talk about what we're actually doing on the ground with the Sand Plain Pines Partnership. And then the Northwoods Fire Training Exchange is something to keep in the back of your mind. If you're interested in learning more about fire, we're going to be bringing that to the Leech Lake Reservation in this spring of 2022. And some of you may recognize Ben Benoit. He's the environmental director of Leech Lake Band. And as we've, the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Division of Resource Management. And when we come to work on this landscape, right, it's not just the forest. It is the homeland of the Leech Lake Nation. And there's been some contentious history, not contentious, but some very challenging history here. In the blue is the Chippewa National Forest. Most of you are probably very familiar with this, but for our online audience, in the red is the Leech Lake Reservation. The Chippewa National Forest is the only it's the only national forest that was actually set up to work and has a responsibility in their agreement as a trust to manage the land in trust for the Leech Lake Nation. What that should look like is some shared management. Unfortunately, for nearly 100 years, that didn't happen, but it's changing now. It actually started changing about 10 years ago when the Chippewa National Forest started looking at some of the historical documents. And what's taking place now is more of a shared management, but it's a learning journey. So TNC has been invited into this partnership of Chippewa National Forest looking for input from the Leech Lake Band on how do we manage this forest? Can we manage it more for blueberries, for snowshoe hare? And to help with the process, TNC has been invited to the table. So the Sand Plains Partnership actually met here about 6 years ago. I can't remember, 2018, so 3 or 4 years ago. They've been meeting, and the work that we're doing on the forest now is the result of the Sand Plains Partnership that was identified back in 2018. So Joey's going to actually talk about what has been happening and transpiring within the forest. The Sand Plains, whoops, sorry. I apologize for that little shriek on the first time doing this area right here. Here's Cass Lake, and here's Lake Winnie. And this is the Sand Plains Partnership acreage. It's about 4,000 acres, mostly pine dominated area, and mostly land, forest that was managed in the past with fire. All right, Joey.
My name is Joey Riley. As someone who's lived in Bemidji for about 7 years and grew up in the North Woods of Minnesota, I was ecstatic to be able to join the Nature Conservancy this summer and to have the opportunity to help promote the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe's goal for restoring ecological function in this forest. And I'm going to take some time here to tell you about the history of this project area, also the sort of give you a description about the project goals for this partnership. And then I'm gonna go through our methodology for what we've been doing in the forest this summer. So on the screen here, you can see this grayscale photo is from the National Archives. It was taken in 1917. And you'll notice that we have these beautiful pine trees, and then a fire has gone through the landscape here. The trees are intact, but the understory has been largely burned up. So historically, this area, where of the sandplain pines, it's very sandy soils, and there's a lot of plants that have adapted to the presence of fire, to even the presence of intense stand replacing fire. And of course, the Ojibwe people understood this biology, and they helped to manage the forest in a healthy and beautiful fashion using fire. So during that time period, before the taking of this photograph, there were this area was known for its large, beautiful pines. There was a diverse mix of different pine species and hardwoods that thrived with the fire. And there were many openings in the forests as well. So it was a welcoming landscape for the people to have their villages and to grow a variety of plants for food. So after the establishment of the Chippewa National Forest, if almost all of that original forest was logged. There was also a stringent routine of fire suppression put in. And ironically, so the description that came along with this picture in the archives was fire destroyed the regeneration here. And I also want to point out this is Lydic Lake, which is nearby, and it's a part of our project area. So it's ironic to me that they said that the fire here destroyed the regeneration. There was another picture that I had seen where they said the forest managers were struggling to get red pine to reproduce. So since this time of fire suppression, most of our red pines have been planted. So the forest managers were just so confused why they couldn't get the red pine to return. So moving forward, oh, that's
Backward.
That's backward. Whoops. Okay, so we currently, this area, this picture up on the top right is a picture of one of the stands that we are working in. So when I say a stand, it's a section of the forest. You can see an example of this in the bottom left picture, how the sections of the forest are broken up into pieces. This allows us to maintain information about that particular area of forest so they can be managed individually. So going back to this picture, this is a very, very normal picture for this landscape. I just throw it out to all of you. Does this look like an area where you'd want to go blueberry picking?
No.
No, probably not. And I can tell you it's quite a pain to walk through an entire understory dominated by hazel, which just happens to be perfectly growing at face height to slap you in the face. So it's just not a welcoming landscape. And it doesn't provide the cultural resources that the tribe needs. So our project is going to work on making a more resilient, a more beautiful, more welcoming landscape, and one that provides the resources for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe that they're relying on. So there's many different tools that we are using to manage this forest. In some cases, it does mean thinning or harvesting trees. However, this is being done exclusively to maybe create openings for for other species, because if we just leave all the hazel and red pine, then everything else is not going to be able to come up. So making space for something new. And it should be noted that many, if not all of the acreage within this area, this project, they might be thinned to help create a more diverse community, but they are being taken out of the logging rotation. So we're hoping to turn this into a functioning ecosystem that it once was. So other ways that other tools that we're using to manage are brushing the hazel and aspen, so that this hazel just grows up and completely covers the forest floor and prevents all of these other plants from growing in. And a way that it was traditionally controlled was with fire. In fact, fire could be used to improve the hazelnut crop. But we can't just set fire to this landscape, because these trees, these skinny, tall, even-aged red pines have never seen fire in their life. Their bark has not adapted to fire on an individual level. They have very thin bark, so it's very possible that a fire could go kind of out of control, especially with this tall hazel here, and cause more mortality of trees than what we're wanting. So in the openings that are being created, there's also some planting going on to make sure that more diverse species can come up. So we're talking about planting balsam fir, white pines, a mix of conifers that are fire dependent. We're also keeping a close eye on the coarse woody debris, which provides shelter for wildlife and is an important component for wildlife habitat. And we're preparing to make these areas, to make them able to be burned regularly. So this picture on the bottom left is called the Leidick Brook area. It's not far from Leidick Lake, which was featured on the last slide. And this Leidick Brook area is, the area in blue, is slated to be burned next year. So we're bringing fire back onto this landscape after more than 100 years. So, and my focus on this project is establishing monitoring plots. So we need to know that the actions we're taking are having the effect that we want, that it's creating a more diverse landscape, so that our time is not being wasted. And also so we can share that information with partners and support them in their projects as well. So that when I get out into the forest, one of the first things that I do is I look at the topography. So is there a slope? What direction is that slope facing? How steep is that slope? Because these can affect fire. Fire can travel up steep slopes more quickly. We want to know what variables are influencing the fire in our project. We also take a close look at the soil. You can see me on the right here. In this picture, I'm actually planting a magnetic beacon to help relocate the plots in the future. But in a similar, I use that trowel there as well to take a look at how deep the leaf litter is, and the duff, which is decomposing leaf litter, because that's fuel for fires. And we want to know how that's gonna impact, that can impact the success of the fire. And it's something we want to know after the burn, how much of that was burned up. So, and finally, we also take a close look at all of the woody debris on the floor. So we count we have different sized plots for different different data points. It's overall kind of in a belt shape. But we in a small plot, we'll count all the twigs. And we'll also look at the logs that are on the ground, because we want to know what kind of fuels are going into this fire. And we also do want to retain some of this woody debris for the benefit of wildlife. So, and the objective of restoring fire is of course, to prevent the risk of a catastrophic wildfire, which can happen when fire returns to a landscape it hasn't been in for a long time, but also to support the culture of the Ojibwe, because this fire has been used to manage cultural resources and also to create a cultural sense of place. And so it has many, many different important roles. One of my personal favorite parts is when we also take a very deep look at the diversity of plants on the ground. So we're not just interested in the trees or the wood. We want to know what kind of plants are living there. And we want to know how they're responding to our management actions. We want to protect traditional medicinals of the Ojibwe and to help them grow in this landscape. So we take count of all the different species of plants within a plot, and then also how much of it there is, what kind of cover it has on the ground, so we can see how that responds to fire as well. And the hope behind this is when we, brush the hazel and burn the hazel, that this can create space for the blueberries to thrive and for the traditional medicinals like shin leaf over here, which was used as a traditional pain reliever. And we also, by looking at these plants and their diversity, we can know what kind of plant community is growing there. So what kind of plants are thriving in this particular forest stand? How can we work with the plants in this forest stand and make them thrive? We take a very thorough look at the regeneration of the forest. So we look at many different levels. We look at the seedlings, so any type of tree or woody shrub that's growing up from the ground, we count them individually, and we also look at how much coverage they have. We look at the saplings or stems, which are kind of like adolescent trees, ones that are, managed to make it through their seedling stage. We want to see what's coming up in this understory. And we take detailed information about each tree within our plot too. So you can see this picture here. John worked with me this summer as a forest data technician as well, and you can see him using this, it's called a DBH tape, or diameter at breast height, and it helps us measure the size of the tree. And we have tools to look at the height of the tree as well, and the species. So yes, a lot of these trees are red pines that have been planted, and we want to know what's there. We want to know what trees, or if any trees die after a fire. We want to know about any tree mortality. A lot of our partners or the Forest Service they're most comfortable using very low intensity fires, which is a great step in the right direction, but sometimes can minimize the ecological impact of the fire. So we are, or I should say, the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe is being a leader in fire here in this forest. They want to burn with hotter fires to have more of an effect on our landscape. And by taking this information, we can help our partners to feel confident in using fire more and more often. So now I did have the honor of working with a number of interns from the Leech Lake Tribal College, and to bring them out into the forest and introduce them to working in the forest. And I believe this program is a really great opportunity for meaningful work. Some people might have aversions to forestry, but there's so many opportunities for people to be responsible leaders and to manage our landscapes with respect for the life growing on them. So I'm going to turn it over to Annette to talk about the future goals of this collaboration.
Thank you, Joey. I'll just that part. Awesome. So as Joey explains, this is a journey, right? This new relationship of working together, partnering between the Chippewa National Forest, partnering with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and TNC coming in as a partner as well. It's a journey that's beginning. It's a journey that we're paying attention to what is happening on the land, what is happening, who's involved, where are we going. Our role has really been for TNC to support the goals of the Leech Lake Band as we move forward. But as I mentioned, it's a journey. So we are learning. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear questions. We hope, these are some of the things that TNC has put forward, that we'd really like to see more students out there. We'd like to see interns. We'd like to see more Indigenous people. We'd like to see more Leech Lakers working in the Leech Lake Forest. And I think one reason we wanted to share our story is to also let people know that working in the forest has so many different opportunities. It's about soils, it's about plants, it's about trees, it's about climate. So there are so many ways to become an advocate for the forest and to involve yourself with work in the forest. So we're just going to wrap up, bringing us back to that tree and sitting in that green, calm light that's always been there for me. We are really looking for a place to create this landscape, to help return a landscape, hopefully, to a place that is resilient, that helps us learn. We learn from the trees, we learn from each other, we learn from science, we learn from the energy and the sense of wonder from being in the woods as well. So with that, we're gonna do some questions. Before I take the first one, we do have, I wanna thank our partners. So we've worked with BJ Gachi this summer from Leech Lake Band, Division of Resource Management. Whoa, Kate Hagston, Keith Carnes, and with the Chippewa National Forest. These are just a few of the names, but if you're interested in talking to someone about this project, these are the people you might wanna talk to. Todd Tisler from the Chippewa National Forest, and as well as Mike Rice. So it's really foresters. There are, and I don't have a forestry background. My background is landscape ecology. So kind of looking at the overall health. And we need all the partners we can get in these types of communities. So I do have, if you want to see something that has happened with fire, cultural fire in the Apostle Islands, I do have that to play after questions. And did we have a question there, Melinda, on the chat? Okay, those were comments. Do we have questions in the room? Yeah.
Is the TNC related or collaborates with the Arbor Day Foundation?
I could not answer because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been with TNC for 2 months. I can find out for you if you'd like. I believe the Arbor Day Foundation is a separate entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know what our level of collaboration is.
We have a question. Oh no, I guess Vicky's coming down there.
My question is delivering itself.
The question is delivering itself momentarily.
That's an amazing idea.
Go ahead, Eric.
Vicky's coming down there. She has a question, but she's gonna run back there.
So we're in two, for those of you online, we're in 2 locations here on campus.
Also, sorry, I just wanted to point out Natalie McCormick here. She works with the Nature Conservancy. She's based out of,
Oh, thank you.
but she is watching in on the video, and she says she's not aware of any
Oh, Joey, I don't think without the volume.
So sorry. So we have our one of our members from the Nature Conservancy, Natalie McCormick, chiming in here, and she's not aware of any collaboration with Arbor Day Foundation, but maybe that's a
Great.
great.
Thank you, Natalie.
To investigate.
Yeah, that's the upside of having this online. Instant answers. Vicki, you had a question?
Yep, I'm gonna take my mask off. It's hard talking through these things. So here at the Tribal College, we know we do internships every summer. And one of the things, I guess my question is, and we've been talking briefly among us about, because of the 11,000 acres returned to our nation, we want to approach our tribal council to request a chunk of land. I don't know how big, 20, 40 acres for us, for the college. I'm out of breath. To establish our own biological station for internships, for research, for science discovery. And so we would look to other partners to help us because, of course, as a tribal college, we never can get funding to establish buildings.
Right.
So we would look at maybe at the Nature Conservancy to help us look at what kind of a building could we put on that for summer internships and all year round. You know, as we begin to build more foresters track, strengthen our forestry track here at the college, but also as a resource.
That sounds wonderful. And as the TNC rep who will be working here over the next, however many years, we will definitely be open to discussion on that and see where we could go.
Okay, because I think that at the college here, we should probably start preparing a presentation and go before the RTC to make that request and then to begin the identification, probably working with the Division of Resource Management for the band.
Awesome. That sounds wonderful. Any other questions from the audience in the room? Brent?
Yeah, so I saw Joey and John and the interns working this summer and collecting a lot of data, and that was great. What do you expect to do with that long term? Is that baseline? Or are you going to make recommendations, reports? Is it a planning tool?
Yep. So,
Is there a hope to someday have a management plan?
I don't know about a management plan. I'm not going to answer that because I'm not sure of that. But the reason for collecting this data is to create a baseline. So as you can imagine, reintroducing fire as a management tool, even though it's quite common on grasslands, is not so common in the forest. And so we need to document what are the changes we're seeing. Can we actually set up this data, not set up, but can we, through the data, identify what's going to work best? So yeah, the idea is we don't know how often you might put fire through and what are the effects. We also are hopeful that the band, because we're working with the band, that they have some knowledge keepers that might know that information, and then they can work on that aspect and inform, if they want to inform the management, that'll be up to the individuals. But happy, and that's kind of what this next piece is about if people have time. But any questions? On the ground work is moving forward at the same time as the monitoring. Thank you, Keith. Keith Carnes is one of the partners. As Joey mentioned, we're set up to burn next spring. And of course, conditions have to be right. This year was not a real good year for any type of burn. So work has been done by the Leech Lake Band. Work has been done by the Chippewa. We've done some thinning, we're doing the monitoring. It's a bunch of moving pieces trying to coordinate together to get to that end. Thanks, Keith. If we have no other questions, I recognize people have classes to get to, but I will play the video from the Apostle Islands and the cultural burning that they have been doing there on Stockton Island. People are interested. It's about a 10-minute video segment. So, Melinda, do you need to?
I stopped your screen share. You'll have to.
Okay. All right. I will play that, and thank you everybody for being here and listening. And hopefully, if you have questions, we'll be around.
Really appreciate you guys coming. Audience, me, you, and you know how to email me if you have any questions.
In terms of the baseline data,
Now, can online stay on if they want?
field plots, you randomize different areas, and what kind of analysis of variance?
Yeah, so we.
Okay. I'm trying to get it playing here and.
These areas are really not. So.
Well, it's in the PowerPoint.
So the initial test then would be to examine whether or not there's any difference in the homogeneity
So-
of the fuel plants that you ran.
So right now, what I'm actually process of compiling 3 years of market data. And at this point, you're looking
There,
at
people
summary
still on?
statistics of how frequently.
All right, I just wanted to, this is the Apostle Islands, and just to give you an idea of where Apostle Islands are located, if you're not familiar, we are over here in Leech Lake, and just northeast of Duluth, these are the Apostle Islands here. You're going to be listening to a speaker, Damon Penick, who is a White Earth band in Rowley, and he worked for the Apostle Islands. I'm too close to the speaker, but I'm going to get this started. And his voice is the one you'll be hearing. Oh, you need to connect to the audio, right? Yep.
We burned all the time, and we're like, can you tell us more, like specifically? And they're like, well, not really, and then so in our Western science approach, we wanted to go out to prove that, you know what I mean? And we don't necessarily need to. We can take it, where it is. And Damon, I'm seeing you shake your head, but I mean, that's part of, I think, it's not a folly on our part, but that's something that we wanted the evidence to support that oral history, and maybe that's not necessary. I mean, I think we can all agree that humans were a prominent ignition source, and where do we go from there? What does that mean?
Yeah, I'll just one more little comment here, and then I'll let Damon speak. So part of it is that if we didn't, at one point, if we didn't have the data,
Sorry, I'm going to
deal
move
with it,
forward to Damon, but
you can't measure it. So
with our land management agencies, and I think from the tribal perspective, it seems to be like a little bit more comfort with just getting fire on the ground and let's do it, make it happen. And so, but what we've seen over at Apostle Islands National Lakeshore with our approach is that we've integrated tribal experiential knowledge into our land management practice to really integrate the two. And so we're seeing that where science falls short and there's a gap in the science, our TEK will fill that in, or where there's a gap in the TEK, our science will fill that in. And so we can collaborate those two together to really make some pretty sound decisions based on management or for management. And I saw in the questions there's one about what are the tribe's priorities, and I responded with land management agencies should start working with tribes, the TIPO office, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, Natural Resources departments to really start, not afterwards, not after you've already decided to do your project and say like, hey, here's the project we're going to do, but as the projects are started, or as you're thinking about projects, integrate those ideas into it to really kind of blend those thoughts and reach out to your local tribes and they'll tell you who else has interest in everything like that. One thing, the slide that I wanted to show here if I could show one slide in this panel, this is it. And it for everybody, it just looks like a guy, watching a backing fire. But who this is, so this is out on Stockton Island, Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, on our first reintroduction of fire back into the landscape on Stockton Island. And this guy right here is a Red Cliff tribal member. And he had just gotten red carded. And this was his first burn that he participated in. And his great grandparents would have been the people that were out on that island, picking berries and burning that space, and managing that landscape for blueberries and managing that landscape for all the other reasons that natives burned. And then as a result of the federal policies and all the other different things that were going on, that stopped. And so that traditional cultural practice stopped, that traditional transmission of understanding of fire and our relationship to the landscape through fire stopped. And then 2 generations later, this young man gets red carded, and he comes back out to close that gap and close that and start bringing that spirit of fire back into our common space, right? So this is the one that I really wanted to share with everybody, because I think what this shows is our ability as land management folks to really integrate our land base original managers back into the decision making process and back into the implementation process. And I don't say that as like we know everything and we're right about everything, but let's at least collaborate and get together on making decisions about our spaces. So, and I see that's happening, in the Superior and Quetico, and over by us is happening, and all over land management agencies are starting to really, not because they have to, but because they feel like it's a good thing to do, and it's the right thing to do, is to bring that experience into the mix. So, yeah, I hope I saw in there also this oppression thing, and I think that's a really important point to make, because we all know that the federal government, there was a policy to oppress or suppress the culture of the people, and with language and stories and ceremonies and our traditional cultural lifeways that were either outlawed or oppressed in some way. Fire and our relationship with fire to the landscape is just one aspect of that. And so when you think of, the ability, I'm involved with a lot of different things with language revitalization and cultural revitalization and ceremonial things. And the knowledge base of, think of like a birch bark canoe, and how much knowledge and experiential relationship goes into building that canoe, and all the different intricacies of making that construction happen, and the gathering and the ceremony that's involved in it. Think about that with fire and about our relationship with fire to the landscape. And if we had that much intimate knowledge about just making canoe, think of how much we had about fire in the landscape, and how easily they're in our communities in this area, there are probably only about 5 canoe makers. And think of how many there used to be, right? And if you apply that same thinking to people that were applying fire and the knowledge that they carried and passed on, same idea, right? So again, it's just about right now, for me, it's about looking into the future. What are we doing into the future? The past is the past, and we can learn from that, and we can learn from all the things that happen. But as we go forward, let's be on the right page of this, and let's be in the right direction with this, and integrate and work with each other to manage our sacred spaces, right? Sacred for all of us.
Hey, Damon, can I piggyback on something? Because when you brought up Stockton, and I think that this is actually a really critical thing to think about too. So I did some fire history on Stockton Island, and Damon was out with us when we were doing the collections, and I remember thinking that it was really hard for us to develop those collections, because there's not a lot of record left from the tree ring record perspective. But we were able to reconstruct some fire events. But one of the things that I'm constantly reminded in discussions in conversations with Damon is that the tree rings tell us part of the story, but a lot of that record still gets lost. And just because the trees, and I saw it in the comments too, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Sometimes trees don't get scarred by fires. Sometimes trees burn up by fires. And I feel like we've maybe are starting to make this shift. And BJ, Brian sort of talked about this a little bit, where
Oops, sorry.
And then Evan Larson is unable to join us today, but also contributed a lot to the materials coming together for this. So with
I apologize. So this is Annette. Just wanted to wrap up this. I wanted to pull the title slide, and that was what I wanted to show you. The guy that was speaking at the end was the guy whose data I showed you. I'm looking at fires and tree rings. But this particular slideshow, if you want to see the entire thing, you can go to the University of Minnesota Sustainable Forestry Center. They have the whole series of educational workshops, and they have webinars. And this one is Fire in Minnesota Ecosystems Workshop that was done on April 16th. It was actually a 3-day workshop. But that's where that clip is from. So you can find it or just email me if you have difficulties. But thank you. Any questions from that? I see there's a few people online. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And you know how to get a hold of Annette, Joey, or myself if you have any further questions to continue this conversation. Miigwech.
How many did we have online? 20? That was about what you guessed.